All right, ma'am, over to you.
Hi everyone. Did you have enough time to have a quick read of the slide which is telling you about the book? So that's why we were waiting for these couple of seconds. Thank you all for being here for this discussion on what is a really important and a really difficult subject. And you heard from the description of the book and the terminology itself, which describes the young people, mostly men, mostly boys in our society, who are targeted, incarcerated, institutionalized in what is called or seen as an attempt at justice, and who are known as children in conflict with law, but it's actually not the children who are in conflict with law. It's the law that is in conflict with those children, and the people we are dealing with are really children. So this book that we're going to be talking about today, and the book has three authors who are on the stage with me. Enakshi, who is the principal author and who has written the substantial part of the book, which deals with the system, which deals with actual cases, which deals with the concept of juvenile justice, and which problematizes this whole notion of delinquency. So Enakshi emphatically rejects the idea of delinquency, and Puneeta and Kalpana are in total agreement with her. So I want to just say to you that whenever I, as moderator, will be using the word delinquency, please assume that it is in quotation marks, and I'm using it as a shorthand to describe something we do not wish to call by that name. And the second part of the book are chapters, very moving, very deep, by Kalpana and Puneeta, which describe in detail their journeys into this field of delinquency or crime committed by young people, and how our social systems receive, treat these people, whether with compassion or with indifference or with cruelty, and who these people are. Who are these supposed criminals that we have in our society? So both Puneeta and Kalpana write about their work with these young people. Puneeta through theater, and Kalpana as a counselor that she is. And I'm going to now turn to each of them and to start the discussion with asking you to describe your individual journeys into this difficult terrain. What was it that led you there? What was it that sparked off your interest? What has the journey been like for you? What have you learned from it? Enakshi, may I ask you to go first?
Thank you so much, Urvashi, and it's a privilege that you should be moderating the session and Mira would be launching the book. I mean, I think we are very blessed. I wanted to begin by just reading something from Trevor Noah, which is in my epigraph, because that describes why I'm here. Trevor Noah writes in Born a Crime, "The hood made me realize that crime succeeds because crime does one thing government doesn't do. Crime cares. Crime is grassroots. Crime looks for young kids who need support and a lifting hand. Crime offers internship programs and summer jobs and opportunities for advancement. Crime gets involved in community. Crime does not discriminate." Now, that is a category of children that we are dealing with, or the book is dealing with. And my journey began simply because there was a child who died inside a home, and nobody would talk about it, and I wanted to know what happened. And that's how in 1993 I started. And every time I look at children, I look at hope, and every time this book's journey is linked to the incident that all of you know as Nirbhaya. The young boy who was called a monster, who was called the worst perpetrator, who was described in every newspaper as somebody who needed to be hanged. The trigger for this book was that. And so the journey of the book is as important as my journey, because we were at that point of time when nobody else was talking about juvenile the Juvenile Act. Nobody was interested ever on the Juvenile Justice Act. Suddenly, everyone became an expert on it. Everybody had an opinion on it. The media, the common people, they all said the juvenile justice law is about letting children go. It is about allowing children to commit offenses. And that's the journey of the book, just to sort of say that that's not true. And nobody knew about this young boy either. We did, because we had to represent him in court. So we knew what his background was, and we knew that he hadn't been the worst perpetrator. We also know that the police inspector who was investigating said so, but the monster headline was the headline on the first page. But the fact that he wasn't the worst perpetrator was in some inside page, and nobody read it. The judge who was dealing, the Juvenile Justice Board magistrate who was dealing, has afterwards said that she couldn't find a thing in the charge sheet to incriminate him. But he had to be kept inside the home. So, that was the trigger for the book. And I think Renuka is here. Renuka heard me speak somewhere like this, and she came and said, I think we need to do a book on this. And so thank you, Renuka, for forcing me to write it. Thank you so much.
Kalpana, you entered this area also through various different personal experiences. And one of the things you comment on in your really interesting chapter is about the question you're always asking yourself, and Puneeta and Enakshi also talk about this. Who are these children? Where do they come from? So that explains a lot about how society looks at them. So can you tell us about your journey?
Thank you, Urvashi. I think my journey also started with what the gentleman who was introducing us termed as the blindness of privilege, because I belong to a regular middle class family, was working in the corporate sector, had a stint in academia, and so the privileges of education, of family, support systems, those I think kept me blinded to a lot that was happening right under my nose in my own community and neighborhood that I never really saw. And it took motherhood, and it took the death of a child to shock me into becoming aware. Motherhood, my own, and like Enakshi was saying, sometimes I think it is the death of a child. It took the death of a child for me to actually open my eyes and become aware of what was happening in my community. And I was working with children, of course, by then. And the fact that no one seemed to care. The nation didn't want to know.
Yeah,
No one wanted to know. The nation really didn't want to know. No one wanted to know what happened to this child, or that how he had died. And that was when I felt that, no, I want to know. I want to know. I want to know, who are these children? Where do they come from? And why is it that no one seems to care? I want to care. And that is where my journey began. And to your question of who really are these children, I think it took me over 15 years to the day to kind of have some glimpse into who these children are. And in the process of course, academically trying to understand who these children are, as well as experientially trying to understand who these children are, what I have discovered is that these are children who are invisible, unheard, unseen, marginalized. These are children who are almost every single child who's coming into the juvenile justice system is from abject poverty. Our children who more than 90% of the time come from single parent families, suffer from deep psychological issues, have history of violence, sexual abuse, substance abuse. These are the realities that they are living with, right? And these are things that are never put on any of the television shows. These are not the things that we talk about when we talk about children in conflict with the law. And one thing I also want to say, as part of the board that sits to adjudicate these cases, is very often we assume that children who come into the juvenile justice system, there is a presumption that these are somehow already, that these have already committed the offenses that they have been charged with. And what I would want to say is that that is not true at all. A very small fraction of these children are actually found guilty of the offenses that they are charged with. So I think even when you were talking about the use of the word delinquent, I would want to put it out there that one word that I would want us to remember always when referring to these children is the use of the word alleged.
Thank you. Thank you for alerting us to that. But in a sense, a leading question or a follow-up question to what you just said is, so does this mean, are we to assume from who these children are, that the elite do not commit crimes?
Absolutely not. It is just that I think the access to resources, the access to support systems that help children to not get into the justice system is available to those of us from the middle class and the elite. So if my child were to commit any of these, I would probably take my child to a counselor. Right?
Yeah. And you would have the privilege to gloss over.
Absolutely.
Enakshi, I can see you want to say something. Yeah, come on.
The only reason, and the book covers some cases that, like the Mercedes-Benz or the school child who's been apprehended for a murder, alleged murder in the Ryan School, Ryan International School. The only reason that these cases have come up now is because of this sudden punitive nature of the shrill cry of society for punitive action. And this large, suddenly there's an awakening for more and more and more punitive action.
Punishment, yeah.
And punishment. And also, that is how these cases have suddenly emerged. But again, you just look at the numbers, there are very few. And nobody looks at the psychological issue. Like this boy, he may have, we don't know, we see still, he used to play the piano, for example. Nobody reads those things in the newspapers. He used to play the piano. He was so frightened of a PTA. It was a parent-teacher meeting he was trying to avoid when he is supposed to have killed this young child. But why would a young boy want to avoid a parent-teacher meeting? What was so frightening? Why is it that nobody saw what were the indications that they should have looked out for this child's mental health? Why is it that nobody does that? And when they fall out of the system and they fall into crime, that's when we all wake up.
And also then the fall continues, because when they are put in an institution, that institution in some senses repeats the cruelties of society. Puneeta, let me turn to you, because one thing is to be aware of this problem, and I think it's very easy for most of us to gloss over it and pretend it doesn't exist. But another thing is to intervene directly into it. And let's say if you want to intervene as you did, as a NGO worker, social worker, activist, whatever you might say, how do you take that first step of entering a space which is really close to you because it doesn't want your intervention in there? What was it like for you, and what did you find when you started to work with theatre?
So, Enakshi, I want to just say that I didn't set out to work with children in conflict with law. I think, a lot like what Kalpana mentioned. When I was young, I found myself drawn to the underdog, even in school. The child that people would make fun of, I would be there kind of, to help them, being like, supporting them. It was parenthood. And the fact that I was the mother of 2 boys, it was a jolt for me. I was doing this women's program called Shakti at that time. And it was all about feminism. And it was like, oh my God, I've got these 2 boys. And I felt so responsible that they should be brought up as sensitized human beings, right? And I think it was also then a disenchantment with the education system that got me to start. That's how I stepped into on-ground work with young people. You know, I volunteered in school, we were doing life skills through theatre, and Sanjay was doing Salam Balak Trust at that point. So the whole intent was to integrate privileged, marginalized children, you know, and we realized that using theatre, it was a great equalizer. But in the course of doing that, you know, I mention it in the book, I met Justice Madan Lokur, who then said, will you work with this group of children who are invisible and who are stigmatized by society? And I had no idea who these children were. So he introduced me to this, and I remember when I walked into, so they're called observation homes, but you know, they're actually children's jails. It's got the high walls, the barbed wire, the guards, the cells, all of that. And I walked in and I found, you know, that these were young people, you know, no different from the others I've worked with. And somehow when I walked in and I kind of saw the whole system, I just felt that I cannot walk away from here, you know. But having said that, you are initially looked at with a lot of suspicion by the state, by the system. Why is she there? And it was really funny because at that point I was heading the Tehelka Foundation. And so they thought I was there to dig up some dirt, you know, and is she there for a sting operation? But then I had to actually, I think we've been now there working on this for the last 10, 12 years. And, you know, I told them, look, I'm a long distance runner, so I'm not here for some cheap story. And yeah, and it's, you just get so drawn into their lives, you know. I don't want to go over what Enakshi and Kalpana have shared, but they are no different from your children and my children. But what he said, you know, what she mentioned of us all having the privileges, the opportunities for education, nutrition, for all of that, they don't have that. And what I've realized is, so it's theatre and art, Urvashi. The idea is to build a sense of self. Because these young boys have been told all their lives, tum bevkoof ho, nikamme ho, kuch nahi karoge. And if you're hammered, that script is hammered into your head throughout, what is your sense of self, you know? And we've seen that when they start being able to create with their hands, whether it is through mud, whether it's through a drawing, that sense of, oh my God, I am, the I am that our children are so aware of, when it's growing in them, you then make them aware of, you know, you have choices in your life. You don't have to go back to drugs and crime. You know, it's like a new birthing that happens. It's a fascinating process, and every 6 months we kind of, so the intent is to integrate them back into mainstream, to have all of y'all who are here to come in and visit. I'm sure, Kalpana, y'all also want them, right? Come, visit, connect with these children, you know, give them a sense of that the world outside wants you. So that's the basic process, and I would love, I mean, we'd all love, after this session, if you all want to, you know, tell us how you can help, do get in touch with us. Sorry, that was my little bit of saying.
No. I'm glad you said that. I have two follow-up questions, and anyone who wishes to come in, really. So you seem to be saying, and I know you are saying, because you all say this in the book, that the system itself is so deeply flawed, despite having put down on paper all the right words about compassion, etc., but somewhere in the very DNA of the system and our society is inbuilt this notion of crime and punishment, that the only solution to crime is punishment. And as Enakshi talks about, you know, being in the same room in the so-called Nirbhaya case with the girl's parents and feeling their pain, and yet feeling that young man's need, and how do you reconcile this? So, in a sense, do you believe that this system can be at all reformed, or is it just up to the efforts of a few individuals? Because obviously the solution has to be long-term. You will work, you will go, something will happen, but the system will stay. How, and are there examples across the world where there are humane systems for this? Anyone who would like to respond?
It's a the juvenile justice system history is a very interesting history across the world. It moved from punitive action it moved from punitive action to reform. And then suddenly, as the world as it is changing, as we see, not just for children, but generally, we are becoming much more sort of punitive in our attitude.
Judgmental also.
And more judgmental, more, should we say, more,
Self-righteous.
self-righteous, yes, that's the word. I mean, much more self-righteous. Suddenly, across the world, there is again a demand for more punitive action. And India, and when that's how the Indian law changed. You know, despite the standing committee of the parliament saying don't change the law, it still changed. And so we have more punitive action for children in the 16 to 18-year age group. So the bottom line is othering. As long as we see it's the other, we forget that it could be my child who was caught with some drug somewhere. We just forget it, right? Or has run over somebody has had a little bit much more alcohol and had run over somebody. We forget all that.
And will I condemn them for life then?
And if the system, if they were to be getting into the system, they would be condemned for life. But the assumption is it will never be us. The assumption is that it will be always the other. So when we make that crossover, and the state does the same, the society does it and the state does it. And the state does it in the way it creates institutions. The kind of people they put in the institution. The caregivers that they put in the institution. The lack of care for the caregivers. They just dump there some people, untrained sometimes, and they're left there unless something happens. If God forbid, somebody dies or a child runs away, then suddenly that person has a face. So it's a faceless group of people who are looking after these children. So when the system is broken, society is demanding punitive action, these children are lost in their own worlds where they don't know who's going to help them or support them, and if they did, then things change. So I think it's a 360 degrees, multiple ways in which we need to go about it. And Netherlands, for example, has community-based rehabilitation. There is an example in Bombay where in a home, the children are taken out. And I asked the question, are you not worried they would run? And Sachi Maniar, who works there, said, you know, when you trust them, they do nothing wrong. They will not run away, they will do nothing wrong. But we don't trust them. We don't trust these children. And yes, some of them will go out and act again. But is that the reason to have a broken system for everybody?
Absolutely. I just wanted to add that across the world, I accepted that incarceration is not the answer. It's not about locking up the children and throwing away the key. And yes, the community-based things. But I just want to say that in all the work we've done, you know, I've realized there's a very thin line between the lawmaker and the lawbreaker. Within the system, yes, because it's that same it's power. And when they come into the home and they're kept there, from the, superintendent, house fathers, welfare officers, the entire hierarchy there, a little stepping out of the line, whatever, and it's violence that's used on them. So, you know, we work a lot with dreams and aspirations with young people, and a lot of them had once told me, we want to join the police force or the army. And I at one point thought, how noble, right, you know, serve the country. And then I realized it's that these guys have a license to have a gun and a firearm. And they can do exactly what I would like to do, but then the state condones that, that's okay, you know. So that whole sense of, you know, the misuse of power, that needs to change within our system also.
I just want to add one line to what Puneeta spoke about, is that in all of these discussions and debates, including the law which says that the aim of the legislation, the Juvenile Justice Act, is about reform and rehabilitation, social reintegration. The entire onus for change seems to rest on the fragile shoulders of that child, you know, which is inherently flawed and unfair. Right? So unless we as a society create an ecosystem that is able to enable this child to actually live up, it is when the family, the family is let down the child, The education system has let down the child. The society has let down the child. We don't want to fix any of that. And yet we want to fix this child who we believe is broken. And we put the entire responsibility for, correction on that child. So I would think that it's the entire ecosystem that we first need to think about.
And that's going to take a lot of...
That is the work of several generations.
Several generations, yeah. How do you keep up your hope? Because working in situations like this is not easy. And it takes a toll on you as well as people who intervene, carrying the burden of that grief, sorrow, the frustrations. What is it that gives you hope? If you can do in 3 quick things, give me one thing of what gives you hope.
So the book is in 2 parts, as you know. The book is about children and the hope they give us. And it is also about people who believe in children and never give up on them. So that's what I've written about. And my examples of people who never give up are these 2, and therefore their essays are in it. So as long as we have people who believe, who are very few, but there are in the system still people who believe. And those are the people we need to enable and empower. I think that's what keeps us going. And looking at them and looking at those children gives me the hope and the energy and the mind to go on.
So, Urvashi, I believe in the inherent goodness of every human being first, right? And I love young people. I love being around them. And I have to say that I actually get attached with every young person I work with. And so when just recently one young boy, we went back, lovely, lovely young boy. We were told, "Ti heart chale gaya." It was like a physical jolt, So it's just that sense of they are your children, So, there's nothing more I want to say to that. Yeah.
I'm the mother of a teenager. Haven't given up hope on her yet. So how can you?
Exactly.
I think it's just you love them, and that's all to it. I think it's an extension of parenting, called by different names, as hard, as heartbreaking, as rewarding as it can get.
I recount in the book an instance in when my son was almost picked up.
Yeah.
And what the whole family went through in those few hours is what scores and scores of parents go through every single day. And I have the privilege of saying, I know the law, who are you, where is your card? They don't have that privilege.
And they go through it for years.
Years and years and years.
And from everybody around them. So there is just so much more that we can talk about, but I want to now bring in a special person who is with us in the audience, who is actually the person who years ago, by making a film called Salam Bombay, began this whole debate. And I would like to now invite Mira Nair on stage to formally launch the book. Mira.
We all know Mira Nair.
So inspiring.
Mira Nair is an Indian-American filmmaker based out of New York. Her production company, Mira Nair Films, Mirabai Films, specializes in films for international audience on Indian society, whether it's the economic, social, or cultural spheres. Among her best-known films, I'm sure all of us are aware, are Mississippi Masala, The Namesake, the Golden Lion-winning Monsoon Wedding, and Salam Bombay. She was conferred the Padma Bhushan by the government in 2012. Can we have the book launch, the unveiling of the book cover here?
Oh,
Yeah,
there's an unveiling over there. Mira.
All of us.
Yeah. Pick that up, right?
Yeah.
And then you have to pick it up.
She's here. Okay, and we can't let her go away like this. We can't let Mira Nair go without speaking to us. Ma'am, can I request you to come and say a few words? Yeah, ma'am. Huge round of applause for Mira Nair.
Thank you so much, and salams everybody in this extraordinary collection of The Intellect is the Jaipur Literary Festival. I am so proud of all of you, really, for this book, A Juvenile, Not Delinquent. Several years ago, almost 40 years ago, I was inspired to make Salam Bombay, but I come from the streets, actually, in many ways, and in cinema verite, making documentary films, and I thought that there's no way you could tell the story of children on the street, children who are denied childhood, without casting and working with actual children who live and are on the streets for a variety of reasons, and also considered delinquent in the way Urvashi referred to it. I was given the courage to make this film in this way of uniting with real children from the street and in a fiction way, in their real environments, but setting it up like a fiction film. It was my first fiction film, and it was this Brazilian filmmaker, Hector Babenco's beautiful film on street kids called Pichot had given me the courage that if he could do it, perhaps I could do it. But the idea always of working with people and children from the street was to make sure that we don't just make the film and go away, was to make sure that we could align or, in this sense, create an institution that would honor children and restore them their childhood while honoring them as children of the street. And that was why Salam Balak Trust was born. But in the beginning, when I was having workshops with kids in Bombay before the movie, on the day we began shooting Salam Bombay, which was in 1987, the Times of India had a cover story that the street child in Brazil who played the title role of Pichot was killed and died. And I just vowed, it was like a sign. I just vowed that would never happen to the kids of Salam Bombay. And not just that, but that hopefully with Salam, we could create a movement that opened their eyes in our own country to street children, to the fact that they deserve a childhood and that they move forward in life and hopefully even have a home one day. And that has happened in about more than 35 years of Salam Balak Trust, largely thanks to Sanjoy Roy and Mira Nair and several 187 social workers who worked with us in Delhi and who worked with also us in Bombay. And so it has at least started this wave of honoring kids in the way that they should be honored. And so when I was asked to inaugurate this and to see Enakshi and Puneeta's and Kalpana's work, I was deeply, deeply moved that this should, this next stage, or it's not really, it goes hand in hand, what is considered a juvenile delinquent and where does that person come from and how can we look at the core of what creates this sense of delinquency. And what I was most interested in, which is our country, is the depravity of class. You know, for the middle and upper classes, we can protect our children in so many ways that are legal and illegal, but not the kid of the street. So I really thank you for focusing on juvenile, not delinquent, but to get this book to see how you can engage with this process because it is everywhere. You cannot close your eyes to the children of our country. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Mira. You want to join us? So, yeah, that was great. Thank you so much. So we have about 7 minutes left. If there are any questions from the audience, we'd be happy to take them. Could I request you to keep them short and direct to whoever the person is you want them answered? We can take 2 more, so are there 2 more hands somewhere? Sorry? Okay, you and then somebody at the, yeah, that person. I'm sorry I can't take everybody else, but let's take those 3, one after the other, and then we'll answer them together. Please go ahead.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. The question of my question is to ma'am, Enakshi ma'am. Ma'am, when you write this book, when you are writing this book, what kind of problem you are facing to do balance between the concept of public opinion of dicey and rights of women and rights of juvenile?
Enakshi, don't answer yet.
Yeah.
Let me take the other two questions. Would you like to ask your...
Yes, please. My name is Molina. I'm from Australia. I'm a lawyer there. We are moving towards restorative justice, and I was wondering whether that has been explored because it focuses on the well-being of the perpetrator or victim or whoever it is. So, yeah, just curious to understand
Thank you. The gentleman at the back, you know who you are? Yes, please. Please speak into the mic.
My question is open to the entire panel. I'm by profession a law student. And my question is, ma'am, we talk of delinquent behavior on part of the child. Of course, it is reflective of our society and consequential of what he sees in the society, what he feels in the society. What are we doing? What concrete system do we have to reform the society, particularly the public officers, the politicians, and big businessmen who are the idols of that young mind? That's my question.
Thank you. Should we take one more? Or, yes? There was someone else at the back who had raised, yeah, please, can you get up and ask your question? I can see your hand raised.
Hi, I'm also a lawyer.
Okay,
And
lawyer.
what has also struck me always is, on the one hand, with the POCSO Act, you infantilize, I mean, when they increase the age of consent, and they, within a few years of each other, on the one hand, they infantilized children and criminalized sexuality amongst the age group of 16 to 18. And on the other hand, they, with the amendments to the JJ Act, they wanted to, try children as adults. So I was just wondering, since you all are well-known stakeholders, what are the conversations you all had, with the law reform, what debates you participated in with, and this whole
Thank
thing
you.
seems to be very...
Yeah, thanks. Now we'll just take, we've got 4 minutes, so a minute each almost.
So I'll answer two questions. One is about the POCSO Act and the one about the book. So when Jyoti Pandey's case happened, the divide became very clear. It became women's rights versus children's rights in many people's minds. It became between the victim's rights versus the perpetrator's right to justice. But when we talk of rule of law and we talk of justice, first and foremost, it's alleged. I think the word should be alleged. We don't even know whether it is true or not. Secondly, everyone has a right to justice. It cannot be one versus the other. Just as the child needs justice, the child needs, we talk about, there is a need for a juvenile justice system. It is well established across the world because there is the need for a concept of a fresh start, which we would give to our own children. And at the same time, justice for the victim is as equally important. It is the nature of the treatment that we are talking about. We are not talking about that the child, if he is a perpetrator or she is a perpetrator, should not be brought to justice. What is the nature of the treatment? Should it be punitive? Should they be hanged? Should there be capital punishment? Those are the questions. In that we say the child needs a second chance. Child needs to be treated as a child. Give a fresh start. Don't use punitive measures. Don't adultify. So we adultify some things and we infantilize others. We adultify. We say children are okay to go and work and earn for the family. Give them the responsibility. But in matters of sexuality, we infantilize them and say they don't know what they're doing. And if they do it, then it's a criminal offense because its age of consent is 18. So because we do not want to touch sexuality is something we do not want to touch. Sexual behavior is something that is taboo. So raise the age of consent, and when we talked about morality, that kind of action is also part of morality and punitive action and punitive thought process.
I want to just take the one on restorative justice. Yes, it's been, I think, with the last 4-5 years, there have been a lot of conversations. Groups in India are working on restorative justice, which, by the way, is to bring the victim and the offender together into a dialogue and conversation. But I have to say that we've not started doing that. I've been actually talking to groups doing that, and I've been very interested in knowing that, have you actually worked with the case? How long did you take it? And right now, I think we're still on the periphery of it. Because to get someone ready, a victim ready to meet the alleged offender is going to take some time. So the conversations have started. You know, we've understood there are workshops happening, etc. But how far have we reached? The process is still on. Kalpana, over to you.
I just want to say that we often think of justice as an outcome, and that there must be a crime and there must be punishment only. But justice is not just an outcome, justice is a process, it's an experience. And the fact that our children or anyone who's seeking for justice from the system, if they are able to get healing from it, that to me is as important an end of justice as the punishment aspect of it.
Thank you so much for making that point. That's a perfect point in the end. Enakshi, we're out of time.
Okay.
We've got 7 seconds.
Yeah,
Can
I
you-
wanted to say that a sense of justice has to be restored.
A sense of justice.
And always just having somebody hanged may not restore the sense of justice to the victim.
Yeah, and Kalpana made that very important point about justice and healing. So I think that's what we take away from here. Enakshi, Puneeta, Kalpana, Mira, thank you all. Thank you all very much for listening.
Thank you so much. We had a lovely discussion. Please, can we have the scarf, sir?